I said no, ma'am. That seat is for real VIPs, not for people like you. Put her back where she came from. The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Silence fell, thick, suffocating, uncomfortable. Passengers froze mid-conversation. A few looked up from their phones. Others pretended they hadn't heard, suddenly fascinated by the safety card in their seat pocket. But everyone heard it. Standing in the aisle of Flight 447, a black woman named Grace Williams held her daughter's trembling hand. The girl, 15-year-old Maya, clutched a worn stuffed panda against her chest, her eyes wide and glassy with confusion. She rocked slightly, a self-soothing motion she'd had since childhood. The noise of the plane, the stairs, the sudden sharpness in the air hostess's voice. It was all too much. Grace's jaw tightened. She didn't respond right away. She couldn't. Because if she opened her mouth, the fury she'd been swallowing her entire life might come pouring out in a way she couldn't take back. The air hostess, Karen Holt, according to her name tag, stood with her arms crossed, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, lips pressed into a thin line that tried to pass as a smile. It wasn't a smile. It was a mask. Beneath it was contempt, cold and practiced. "Ma'am," Grace said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "My daughter has autism. She's overwhelmed." The seat was empty and I thought. "I don't care what you thought," Karen interrupted, her tone still sickeningly sweet, like poison drizzled over honey. "That section is reserved for first-class passengers and VIPs. You're in economy. So unless you have an upgrade receipt, I'm going to need you to return to your assigned seat. Now." Maya whimpered. Her hands fluttered near her ears, fingers tapping rapidly. A stim, a way to cope with the rising panic. Grace squeezed her daughter's shoulder gently, grounding her. "She's having a meltdown," Grace said, quieter now, pleading without begging. "I just need a few minutes. The seat is empty. No one's using it." Karen's eyes flicked over them, mother and daughter, and something ugly flickered behind her professional facade. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough that only Grace could hear the venom. "Listen," she said, her smile never wavering. "I don't make the rules. But if I let you sit there, everyone's going to want special treatment. You understand, don't you?" It was the tone. The patronizing lilt. The way she said "you" like it was a category, not a person. Grace understood perfectly. Before we continue, hit subscribe if you believe no one deserves to be judged by the color of their skin. Grace took a breath. She looked down at Maya, whose tears were starting to spill over, silent and heartbreaking. Her daughter didn't understand why the nice lady with the smile was being mean. She didn't understand why her mother looked so sad. "Come on, baby," Grace whispered, guiding her daughter back down the aisle. "Let's go back to our seats." They walked past rows of passengers. Some looked away. A few offered sympathetic glances. One older woman shook her head in disgust, though whether it was aimed at Karen or at Grace, it was hard to tell. A man in a business suit 2 rows back had his phone out. He wasn't even hiding it. The red recording dot blinked silently as he filmed the entire interaction. Karen stood in the aisle, watching them retreat, her smile finally fading into something smug. She smoothed her uniform and turned back toward the galley, already moving on. Another day, another complaint she'd never hear about. Another passenger she'd never have to think about again. She had no idea. Back in their seats, row 34, middle and window. Grace buckled Maya in and handed her the panda. Maya buried her face in the soft fabric, her breathing uneven. Grace stroked her daughter's hair, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're okay. We're going home soon." But it wasn't okay. And the world was about to know it. Because that man with the phone, he didn't just record the video. He posted it. Captioned it, "Racist air hostess humiliates autistic black teen and her mother on Flight 447. This is 2025. This is still happening. Within 20 minutes, the video had 10,000 views. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, it had hit 100,000. Comments flooded in outrage, disbelief, calls for accountability. People tagged the airline. They tagged news outlets. They tagged civil rights organizations. And someone, a journalist who'd been following stories of discrimination in the aviation industry, recognized the woman in the video. Not Karen. Grace. Because Grace Williams wasn't just anyone. She was a respected clinical psychologist, an advocate for neurodivergent children, and the wife of the Honorable Richard Williams, the Minister of Aviation. At that exact moment, Richard Williams was in his office in the Capitol, reviewing budget proposals for new airport infrastructure. His phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. He glanced at the screen. Messages from colleagues. A tagged post. A news alert. He opened the video. And the world stopped. He watched his wife, his Grace, stand there with quiet dignity while a flight attendant spoke to her like she was nothing. He watched his daughter, his Maya, his sweet girl who loved animals and could recite every fact about pandas, trembling, confused, trying so hard to hold it together. He watched them walk back to their seats. He watched strangers stare. Richard's hand tightened around his phone. His jaw clenched. His assistant knocked and poked her head in. "Sir, there's a—" "Cancel everything," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm going to the airport." She blinked. "Sir." "Now." He stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of his office with the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. On the plane, Karen Holt moved through the cabin with her cart, offering drinks and snacks, her smile back in place. A passenger asked for a Coke. Another wanted pretzels. Everything was normal. She didn't check her phone. She didn't see the video. She had no idea that her face was currently being shared across every social media platform, that her name was trending, that the airline's PR team was in full-blown crisis mode. She had no idea that the man whose daughter she'd humiliated was already on his way. The flight landed smoothly 2 hours later. Passengers began gathering their things, eager to disembark. Grace helped Maya with her seatbelt, whispering soft words of comfort. Maya's meltdown had passed, but she was exhausted now, leaning heavily against her mother. "Almost home, baby," Grace said. They waited for the aisle to clear before standing. Grace didn't rush. She held her daughter close, protective, as they moved toward the exit. Karen stood near the door, offering her standard farewell. "Thank you for flying with us. Have a wonderful day." Most passengers ignored her. A few shot her cold looks. One woman muttered, "Shame on you," as she passed. Karen's smile faltered. Confusion flickered across her face. What was that about? Then she stepped off the plane and froze. The jet bridge was packed. Not with passengers. With people in suits. Security personnel. Airline executives. Cameras. And standing at the center of it all, calm and unmoving, was a man in a crisp navy suit. Richard Williams. His eyes locked onto Karen's. She didn't recognize him. Not at first. But she felt the weight of his gaze, the way it stripped away her mask, her excuses, her justifications. "Ms. Holt," he said quietly. His voice carried. Karen blinked. "Ah, yes." He held up his phone. The video played. Her voice, sharp and dismissive. Grace's face, composed but pained. Maya's trembling hands. "You looked down on her," Richard said, his tone soft but lethal, "not knowing she was already far above you." The color drained from Karen's face. And if you're still watching, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. I didn't," Karen stammered. "I was just doing my job. There are rules." "Rules," Richard repeated, his voice hardening. "You humiliated my wife. You reduced my daughter, a child with autism who was in distress, to people like you. You used your authority not to serve, but to demean." One of the airline executives stepped forward, pale and sweating. "Minister Williams, we had no knowledge of." "Save it," Richard said, not breaking eye contact with Karen. "I've already spoken with your CEO. This airline's operating license is under review as of 1 hour ago, and Ms. Holt's employment is terminated, effective immediately." Karen's legs buckled. No, please. I didn't know. You didn't need to know who I was, Richard said, his voice quiet again, but filled with something sharp and final. You needed to see them as human. That's all. Behind him, Grace and Maya emerged from the jet bridge. Grace saw her husband and stopped, tears finally breaking free. Richard turned, his expression softening instantly. He crossed to them in 3 strides and wrapped them both in his arms. Maya, still clutching her panda, looked up at her father. Daddy, the lady was mean. I know, sweetheart, he whispered, kissing the top of her head. But she can't hurt you anymore. Grace buried her face in his shoulder, shaking. Not from fear. From relief. From exhaustion. From the weight of holding it together finally being lifted. Karen stood frozen watching them. Watching the love, the protection, the humanity she denied them. Security escorted her away. The cameras followed. By morning, every major news outlet would have the story. The airline would issue apologies, promises of reform, sensitivity training. Some of it would be genuine. Most of it would be damage control. But for Grace and Maya and Richard, none of that mattered in this moment. They went home. Maya fell asleep in the car, her head on her mother's lap, her panda tucked under her chin. Grace stroked her hair, staring out the window, still processing. Richard reached over and took her hand. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he said quietly. Grace squeezed his hand. You were. You always are. In the days that followed, the video would be viewed millions of times. Debates would rage about racism in customer service, about ableism, about the invisible battles fought by black families every single day. Some would defend Karen, claim she was just following policy. Others would call for accountability, for change, for consequences. But at the end of it all, one truth remained. Dignity cannot be stripped away by hate. It can only be given away. And Grace Williams had never given hers away. Not once. She'd held her head high, protected her daughter, and walked back to her seat with the quiet strength of a woman who knew her worth, even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. That's the real story. Not the fall of an air hostess. Not the power of a minister. But the unshakable humanity of a mother who refused to let cruelty define her daughter's world. Subscribe to True Black Struggle for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate strength. Because this is more than a story. It's a reminder that we rise, that we endure, and that dignity, once claimed, can never be taken away.